That morning, the icy air seeped through the cracks in the old warehouse where Sophia lived. The smell of paint and damp wood was so constant it had become part of her skin. Among cans of varnish and broken furniture, she spent her days sanding, restoring, and selling whatever she found in the trash. She had learned to sleep in a corner of the workshop, on a thin mattress covered with dust-stained blankets. Every dawn was the same: silence, tiredness, and a cup of instant coffee made with lukewarm water. It had been 3 years since she had signed the divorce papers, but she still heard Richard's voice telling her that without him she was worthless. Sometimes that echo was louder than the sound of the trucks outside. Sophia didn't recognize herself in the mirror. Her eyes, once curious and full of life, now reflected a mixture of fear and resignation. She had been an architect, with immense honors and dreams, but her ex-husband's subtle manipulation had slowly erased that identity. "You don't need to work, I'll take care of everything," he would say with a smile that seemed affectionate, but was actually controlled. 10 years later, Sophia barely remembered what it was like to talk about her own projects. The divorce had left her homeless, penniless, and without pride. All she had left was that small makeshift workshop and the strength to keep breathing another day, even if she didn't know why. That day, Sophia left earlier than usual. Winter in New York felt harsher when one had nowhere else to go, but she had already grown accustomed to the cold that ached her fingers. She walked the side streets of Manhattan, searching for something useful among the garbage bins of mansions. Some neighbors looked at her with disdain. Others pretended not to see her. For her, that no longer mattered. She had learned to move with the discretion of someone who expects nothing. With an old hat covering her messy blonde hair and her lips chapped by the wind, she stopped. In front of a large dumpster, behind a stone house with boarded-up windows. Inside the container were remnants of antique furniture, chunks of solid wood, and a broken lamp that must have once been beautiful. Sophia climbed onto the edge of the container and began sorting through it, piece after piece, with the care of someone searching for more than an object, perhaps for meaning. It was then that she heard a voice behind her, firm and polite, asking her name. She turned sharply, thinking it was a guard or an annoying neighbor, but instead found herself standing before an elegant woman with dark hair pulled back and a gray coat. "Are you Sophia Hartfield?" she asked. Sophia didn't respond immediately. No one had called her by her maiden name for years. The woman introduced herself as Victoria Chen, an attorney with the firm of Crane and Foster, and held out a clean business card, as if she didn't belong in the dusty, rusty surroundings. Sophia took it suspiciously, not understanding what a lawyer could possibly want with someone like her. Victoria spoke calmly but directly. She explained that she had been searching for Sophia for weeks and had found her thanks to an old address registered to her uncle, Theodore Hartfield. Hearing that name, Sophia felt a pang in her chest. She hadn't seen her uncle in over 15 years, the only one who had ever believed in her talent as an architect. Victoria asked her to accompany her. "It's something important," she said. Sophia hesitated, looked at her paint-stained hands and the dumpster full of debris, feeling the scene too absurd to make sense. Still, something inside her compelled her to agree. She walked with Victoria to a black car parked in front of the abandoned house. On the way, the lawyer explained the gist. Theodore Hartfield had died a few weeks earlier and had named her his sole heir. Sophia stopped dead in her tracks, as if gasping for air. She thought it was a cruel joke or a bureaucratic mix-up. But Victoria assured her it wasn't. Everything had been signed, authenticated, and notarized. During the drive to the office, Sophia hardly spoke. She stared out the window at the skyscrapers she'd once dreamed of designing, but which now seemed to belong to another world. Every word Victoria said sounded unreal. Inheritance, company, properties, $47 million. It was all so distant from her current life that she was afraid to believe it. When the car stopped in front of a glass building in Midtown, Sophia felt like she was entering a dream from which she would wake up at any moment. The receptionist greeted her by name, and for the first time in years, someone treated her with respect. In the boardroom, Victoria unfolded a thick folder containing documents and photographs. Among them was a handwritten letter bearing Theodore Hartfield's personal seal. Sophia recognized it immediately. The seal was the same one her uncle used on the plans he drew when she was a child. Victoria explained that her uncle had followed her career from afar, that he knew of her talent, and that he deeply regretted her marriage to Richard. In the letter, Theodore asked her to take over as director of Hartfield Architecture for a year, to demonstrate that the family legacy lived on. If she fulfilled this condition, the entire inheritance would be hers permanently. Sophia felt a tremor run through her hands as she read the last lines of the letter. Her uncle spoke to her as if he were still alive. He reminded her of the afternoons in his workshop, the smell of tracing paper, and the way she dreamed of building spaces that made people feel at home. There was a silent but profound love in those words, the kind of faith she had lost in herself. When she finished reading, she didn't know whether to cry or laugh. After so many years of being invisible, someone had truly seen her, even if he was no longer in this world. That same afternoon, Victoria took her to the main Hartfield Architecture building. It was a tower with a classical facade, with white marble and the logo engraved in bronze above the entrance. The employees looked at her curiously, as if they couldn't believe that this woman with simple clothes and tired eyes was the new heir. Sophia felt out of place, but she also noticed something different, the feeling of being back where she truly belonged. She walked through the lobby, looking at the models and old photographs. In all of them, her uncle appeared, smiling, holding projects that now bore his last name. When she reached the top floor, Victoria opened a double door and invited her in. It was Theodore's old office, maintained as if he still worked there. The scent of waxed wood and old coffee filled the air. On the desk, an envelope with her name on it waited. Inside was a gold key ring labeled North Studio. Victoria explained that it was her uncle's personal workshop in his former family home. He said you'd understand everything there. She added before saying goodbye. Sophia was left alone in that silent office, staring out the window at the city. For the first time in a long time, she felt something inside her ignite again. That night, she couldn't sleep. The words of the letter echoed in her mind. If you remember who you are, nothing will be lost. The next morning, she took a train to the outskirts of town, heading for the old Hartfield house. When she arrived, the facade was covered in ivy, but the place was still, imposing. She opened the door with the key on her key ring, and a scent of old wood and dust enveloped her. She walked through the hallways with a mixture of nostalgia and respect, until she found a door with a small plaque that read, North Studio. Inside, time had stopped. The studio felt like a sanctuary. The windows faced north, where the light was soft even in winter. Plans, models, and tools were scattered neatly on a large table. But what caught Sophia's eye most was a set of folders, labeled with her name. Each contained sketches and projects of hers, some she'd done in college, others she'd thought lost. Her uncle had saved them all, even adding notes in the margins, as if he'd been guiding her from a distance. At that moment, Sophia burst into tears, unashamed, unrestrained. She spent hours reviewing everything. Every stroke, every observation, reminded her why she loved to create. The silence of the studio became a kind of companion. There was no judgment, only respect for what once was. As the sun began to set, Sophia sat in front of the large window and breathed deeply. For the first time in a long time, she felt the darkness wasn't devouring her, but rather giving her space to begin again. That night, she slept on a dust-covered sofa, hugging the plans as if they were her only certainty. The next day, she knew she would try again. Sophia returned to the city with renewed determination. The fear was still there, but it was different. It no longer paralyzed her, it drove her to move. On her first day as director of Hartfield Architecture, she felt every eye on her. Some employees murmured, others merely feigned politeness. Charles Carmichael, the chairman of the board, was the first to underestimate her. "We hope you will maintain your uncle's vision," he said with a tight smile, knowing what he really meant was, "Stay out of the way." Sophia didn't respond. She knew she would have to earn respect with actions, not inherited titles. Over the next few weeks, she devoted herself to observing. She arrived before everyone else and left later. She learned every detail of the company's operations, the projects underway, and the financial mistakes some managers tried to hide. It wasn't easy. Many deliberately ignored her, treating her like an outsider or a figurehead, but every obstacle ignited something dormant in her. She returned to drawing, to thinking about humane, sustainable, beautiful spaces. Jacob Sterling, a veteran architect who had worked with Theodore, was the first to notice her talent and offer support. Jacob watched her alone one afternoon in the model room, correcting plans with the same concentration he remembered in Theodore. He approached her and told her that he too had lost faith in the company after the founder's death, but watching her work reminded him of the old days. Sophia silently thanked him. She didn't know whether to trust him, but this discreet alliance would be the beginning of her reconstruction. Together they revisited old projects, recovering the essence Theodore had sought to preserve, building places that made people feel protected, not impressed. The first major challenge came with a presentation to an international client. Charles Carmichael had tried to sabotage her, delivering incomplete versions of the project and deleting files from the internal network. Sophia discovered this the morning of the meeting. For a moment, she considered canceling the whole thing, but something inside her refused to back down. She entered the room empty-handed, and while everyone waited for her to collapse, she grabbed a marker and began drawing the project by hand on the whiteboard. The lines emerged confidently, fluidly, as if time had stopped. No one breathed until she finished. When Sophia finished drawing, the room erupted into a silence that weighed more than any applause. The client, a European businessman, stood up and said with a genuine smile that he hadn't seen such a human presentation in years. At that moment, even the detractors were speechless. Charles Carmichael feigned enthusiasm, but his discomfort was evident. Sophia wasn't looking to humiliate anyone, only to demonstrate that she still knew who she was. That presentation marked the beginning of a change. The respect that no one wanted to give her at first, she now began to earn with every stroke of her hand. That night, back in her temporary apartment, Sophia lit an old lamp and stared at the blueprints spread out on the table. Tiredness mingled with a new feeling, pride. Not the arrogant pride she knew from her ex-husband, but the kind that comes from knowing you survived the collapse. She thought about everything she'd been through to get here, and about the people who had once felt just as broken. If you're reading this far, you're probably familiar with that feeling of starting over. Tell me where you're viewing this from. I want to know if you've ever had to rebuild yourself like Sophia. The next day, Sophia arrived at the office early. She had decided to implement a new policy, opening the studio to young talent who couldn't afford a college degree. Many employees were skeptical, but Jacob supported her from the start. Together they organized a national call for proposals, and in less than a month they received hundreds of portfolios. Among them, one stood out, that of Emma Rodriguez, a 22-year-old student of Latinx origin who had learned about architecture by observing buildings in her neighborhood. Sophia saw in her a younger version of herself, someone who didn't need approval to demonstrate her worth. Emma arrived at the company with the shyness of someone treading on unfamiliar territory, but with the bright eyes of someone who carries a fire within. Sophia took her under her wing, teaching her not only techniques but also the importance of empathy in design. Architecture isn't about building walls, it's about tearing them down, she would often repeat. As Emma grew professionally, Sophia felt her own purpose coming together. It was as if the pieces that life had taken from her were finally starting to fit together. The company was beginning to transform from the inside out. As the months passed, Hartfield architecture began to regain its lost prestige. Sophia's projects focused on accessible and sustainable spaces, with a human approach that contrasted with the coldness of her competitors. Her leadership inspired the teams, and even the most skeptical began to recognize her vision. The specialized press published an article titled, "The Heiress Who Rebuilt More Than an Empire," and that day, Sophia cried in front of the newspaper. Not out of vanity, but because she understood that her value depended not on any surname or any relationship. She was finally free. But the past soon returns when she smells success. Richard, her ex-husband, reappeared with messages and calls that she initially ignored. Then he began sending more aggressive emails demanding his share of the fortune. Sophia knew that all he wanted was money and control, just like before. With Victoria Chen's help, she gathered all the documentation proving the years of psychological abuse and financial manipulation. She decided not to hide or fear anymore. This time she would face her story head-on, in court and before herself. The trial was long and exhausting. Richard arrived with an army of lawyers, certain he would humiliate her again, but he didn't count on Sophia's calm. She didn't need dramatics or tears. She just showed the evidence. Emails, financial records, recordings of conversations in which he repeatedly degraded her. Each document was like a piece of truth that reconstructed the image he had tried to destroy. In the courtroom, some observers murmured, surprised by the serenity with which he spoke. There was no resentment, only a dignity born of pain, transformed into strength. When the judge ruled in her favor, Sophia didn't smile. It wasn't a euphoric victory, but a closure, a cycle that was finally ending. She left the courtroom with the cold evening air hitting her face, taking a deep breath, as if the wind were cleansing the remnants of the past. Victoria was waiting for her outside, and for the first time, Sophia allowed herself a sincere hug. "That's it," the lawyer said, and Sophia nodded. That night, upon returning to her apartment, she wrote on a piece of paper, "Silence is not peace, it is a pause," before speaking the truth. Over time, the trial became news. Many media outlets highlighted Sophia's courage in exposing the psychological violence she had suffered, something rarely discussed publicly. But she wasn't seeking fame or revenge. She simply wanted closure on a story that had consumed her for years. Meanwhile, at Hartfield Architecture, the firm continued to grow. New projects included community centers, public libraries, and affordable housing for low-income families. Sophia was transforming her family legacy into a tool for healing, not only her own life, but that of others. Jacob Sterling became her closest partner. They shared not only a passion for architecture, but a similar outlook on life, calm, respectful, and purposeful. They often worked late discussing how buildings could reflect people's dignity. With him, Sophia discovered a different kind of companionship, free from manipulation and fear. It was a relationship without demands where professional admiration and empathy grew naturally. There were no promises, only a mutual understanding that, little by little, began to heal the voids of the past. The most profound change in Sophia wasn't reflected in headlines or financial statements, but in her way of looking at the world. She was no longer afraid of making mistakes or being judged. She had learned that absolute control was just another form of fear. Therefore, every new project she approved had to have a human component. Scholarships. For students, the inclusion of local artisans or recycled materials. Hartfield Architecture became an example of purposeful innovation. Emma Rodriguez, now one of its most prominent architects, used to say that working there was building hope with plans and hands. A year after taking over as CEO, Sophia received an offer to buy the company, $300 million. The board pressed her to accept. They said it was a unique opportunity, but she didn't hesitate for a second. She rejected the proposal, explaining that her uncle hadn't founded Hartfield Architecture to make fortunes, but to create real impact. That decision surprised everyone, but it also revealed what Theodore had seen in her, the ability to choose purpose over profit. In that instant, a secret clause in the will that no one knew about was activated. Victoria Chen called her the next day with the news. The rejection of the sale had triggered a second part of the will. Theodore had left an additional inheritance of $30 million, reserved in case his niece proved that the purpose was worth more than profit. Sophia couldn't believe it. It wasn't about the money, but the message behind it. Her uncle had completely trusted her moral judgment. When she read the enclosed letter, she felt Theodore's voice still guiding her. True architecture doesn't build walls, it builds meaning. That night, Sophia gathered her team and announced the creation of the Hartfield Fellowship, a scholarship program for young people from disadvantaged communities who wanted to study architecture and sustainable design. Emma was one of those in charge of leading the project. Seeing the excitement on those kids' faces was one of the greatest rewards Sophia had ever had. It was no longer about her or her past, but about all that could flourish from what had survived. The ruins, she reasoned, were just the first step in rebuilding. The program grew rapidly. In less than a year, the Hartfield Fellowship had awarded scholarships to more than 50 students and funded projects in different cities across the country. Sophia traveled constantly to visit the projects, rural schools, public parks, women's and veterans' shelters. In each place, she found stories of struggle that reminded her of her own. She didn't do it for recognition. She did it because she understood what it meant to start from scratch. On these trips, she also began to keep a field journal where she recorded ideas, emotions, and the names of people who inspired her. One of those projects took her to a small town in Vermont, where the team was building an eco-friendly library. There, a girl asked if it was true that she had lived on the streets. Sophia smiled and replied yes, that sometimes you have to lose everything to discover your true worth. That response went viral after someone recorded the moment and shared it on social media. Thousands of women commented, identifying with her story. The success of the Hartfield Fellowship attracted the attention of the media, universities, and public agencies. Sophia was invited to give lectures, though she always maintained that she wasn't a hero, but rather a lucky survivor. In each talk, she recalled the day she was found in that dumpster and how, from that low point, she had begun to rebuild. She told it without embellishment, with the honesty of someone unafraid to show the cracks. The ruins are also part of the structure, she said. Her story no longer belonged to her. Alone, it had become a mirror for thousands. Jacob accompanied her to every event, always in the background, observing with silent pride. Although there was an obvious affection between them, they both knew their connection transcended the romantic. It was a bond born of respect, shared experiences, and a shared vision. One afternoon after a conference in Chicago, he confessed that Theodore would be proud. Sophia smiled, her eyes shining, and replied, "Maybe now I'm building what he dreamed." Guv. In that moment, Jacob understood that she was no longer seeking approval. She had become her own legacy. Over the years, Sophia built Hartfield Architecture into one of the most respected firms in the United States. Under her leadership, the company not only generated profits but also purpose. The new locations in Seattle, Austin, and Denver were designed as open spaces where students, architects, and artists could work together on social projects. Sophia ensured that each building reflected a principle her uncle always repeated. Architecture is a conversation between the human being and the space. That legacy now pulsed in every work that bore his name. At the same time, her personal life had become calm, almost serene. She bought a small house near the sea in Montauk where she spent her weekends restoring furniture, just like in the old days, but this time without the pain. That workshop by the ocean became her refuge. There she drew, wrote, and received former interns who came to visit her. Emma Rodriguez, now a renowned architect, visited her frequently. The two would talk for hours about the future of social architecture and the power of a project to change the life of someone who just needs a chance. One autumn, Sophia received a special invitation. The university where she had studied wanted to honor her with an award for her contribution to the field of social architecture. She accepted, albeit somewhat shyly. When she arrived at the auditorium, She saw hundreds of young faces waiting for her. Some held copies of their projects. Others simply wanted to hear her story. On stage, Sophia spoke without a script. She told how she had lost everything, how shame had driven her to hide, and how her love for her craft rescued her when no one else would. She didn't speak of millions or titles, but of dignity and second chances. Her words echoed in the silence of the auditorium. Many students wiped away tears, and the professors looked at her with genuine respect. Sophia ended her speech by saying that the biggest mistake is confusing success with personal worth. "You can lose everything and still be valuable," she stated. That night, as she left campus, she felt light, as if part of her history had finally found peace. The cold New York wind no longer reminded her of poverty and loneliness, but of movement. It was the same air that had accompanied her since that dumpster, but now it smelled of freedom. With the university's recognition, Sophia's story reached even further. Her speech went viral on social media, and thousands of people began sending messages telling her how her words had helped them not give up. Sophia responded to some of them personally, especially women experiencing abuse or loss. She felt her mission was no longer just in the buildings she built, but also in the lives she touched. Hartfield Architecture launched a new initiative, an emergency fund for women architects leaving abusive work environments. It was her way of giving back to what life had taught her through hardship. Shortly after, she was invited to open an exhibition featuring her firm's most iconic projects. The attendees included former employees, students, and even some of the workers who had worked on the largest projects. Sophia walked through the gallery, observing the models, each representing a moment in her personal reconstruction. At the end of the tour, she stopped in front of a model of the Norte studio, the place where it all began. And if this story made you think of someone who also deserves a fresh start, share it. Maybe that's just what they need today to remember who they are. That night, returning home to Montauk, Sophia sat by the sea with a glass of wine and a notebook in her hands. She didn't need to write a new project or design anything else. She just wanted to record what she'd experienced. On the first page, she wrote, "It's not what you build, but what you rebuild when everything falls apart." She closed her eyes and listened to the waves crash against the rocks, just as she had in the days when she had nothing. But now she understood that true wealth lay not in what she owned, but in the peace she had regained. Eventually, Sophia and Jacob decided to marry on the terrace of the Hartfield building, right where Theodore had designed a suspended garden symbolizing the union of heaven and earth. It was a small ceremony, surrounded by employees, friends, and former interns. There was no luxury, just flowers, soft music, and a sense of excitement filling the air. As the sun set behind the skyscrapers, Sophia took Jacob's hand and realized she had closed all the unfinished business. Their story, once marked by pain, had become a testament to what it means to choose life again and again. Years later, Sophia was invited to give a speech at an architecture graduation ceremony in New York. She walked calmly onto the stage, without notes or papers, and began by talking about the young woman she once was, the one who believed that losing everything meant the end. She recounted how life had pushed her into a dumpster to remind her that greatness lies not in the walls one puts up, but in the strength one finds to rebuild. "You don't lose yourself," she said firmly. "You just forget for a while. And true architecture begins when one remembers oneself." The audience erupted in applause. After the event, Sophia stood alone on the stage, looking at the empty chairs. She smiled with that peace that only comes when wounds no longer hurt, but teach. From the back of the room, Emma Rodriguez watched her with tears in her eyes. She knew that this speech was the perfect ending to a story that spoke not only of buildings, but of humanity. Outside, the city sky lit up with the reflection of the skyscrapers that bore her name. Sophia Hartfield was no longer the woman from the dumpster, but the soul who had learned to build futures with the ruins of the past.